Hello everybody and welcome back. So what I'm going to do in this lesson is just show you a little demo of the tool that we're going to be building next so that we sort of know which direction we're headed, what we're wanting to do with it, and so that you can kind of see how we get there and maybe even try bits yourself before seeing how we tackle it together. Right, so we've obviously built our scene data node, which I'm still using the class one, right? But obviously you will have published it without that class, so yours will just be called scene data. And this all works perfectly fine, right? Now mine obviously already loaded this because my variables were actually already set. But if they hadn't, we would just, start over there, and then we go and just pick our test project that we were working with, and one of the scenes from there, so we can pick anything, new scene or test scene or whatever. So basically we use this to set our variables, and now we want to save. Now I know that it's really easy to just go file save or file save as and just save our scene. It's something that we do all the time, and it's often overlooked as a very important a very important step in working correctly. When you're working in a bigger studio, or I guess even if you're going to have a small studio but with different freelancers, or maybe you work on something and then someone that's not in your same office, or they could be in an entirely different country is maybe sort of collaborating with you, you need to save your scenes very specifically. Okay, it's the number one thing that I've found where we end up with issues at a studio is when somebody has not saved their scene in the right location. Somebody is working on a particular effect and then they go off on holiday, and suddenly, I need to pick it up, and where is it? I have no idea where to find it. I go looking through the server in that shot, and it's nowhere to be found because they were working in some test folder that they created, or they were deving in a different folder and then just continued to work on the shot from that folder. And how do I know that? So that's one of the big issues. Or even if I can find where they've saved it, how do I know which one's the latest? Now, sure, you can look at date modified, but that is not always accurate. I've had times where I've handed over a shot to someone, and so I save the latest version for them, and I say, okay, you use this version, but I can't keep working on one version back because I'm not actually doing anything like kind of permanent that needs to be kept, but I'm testing something in that scene so that if it works, I can then go later on and add it back into the latest version. So there's a lot of kind of scope here for things to go wrong. And so I always get very strict with my team about saving their scenes correctly. A strict naming convention is very important because it tells you exactly what that scene file actually is doing, right? What stage were you at? Who worked on it? What does it relate to? Because within one shot, you're working on, there's the lighting department, but there's the effects department, so there's multiple people working on that one shot in different contexts. Even within effects, we'll often have 4 or 5 artists working on one shot because they each get assigned a different effect to kind of champion all the way through the show. So that one shot might have a big explosion in the background and some magic in the foreground, and those are 2 different people working on that shot. So saving in the correct location and saving with a very specific naming convention so that everybody knows what that scene is. So then when I need to pick it up later and make a quick change, or the person goes on holiday, or we're rendering over the weekend to, because maybe the project is due next week and we're sort of pushing on the weekend, and then something breaks and now someone needs to quickly pick it up. It's all chaos unless there is structure to the way that the scene files are saved. Okay, so that's my little sort of rant over about how important saving your scenes is. And honestly, I find that most people's naming conventions for their scenes, if it's left up to them to just say file save as and go and save it themselves, is shocking to say the least. People think that they're going to name the files correctly, but everyone picks a slightly different convention, and what they often don't think about is the actual alphanumeric ordering of that scene. Okay, so let me show you an example. This is something that this has happened before, and in fact, at most studios where I've worked, there was no proper naming convention to saving the scenes until I got there and was like, hey guys, we really need to get this all in order, and built a tool, basically this tool that I'm going to show you, to save scenes in a very specific way, and then suddenly everything's all structured, right? So left to their own devices, people will go and often do something like this. So they'll name, you know, even if they put it in the right location, you know. So here we're in new test in scenes and our actual scene, so new scene, and then in the working files, right, which is where we want our HIP files to be. So if this is where they're in the right location, great, okay, step one. But now they'll go and do something like name it, you know, they're working on maybe some, you know, an explosion, right? So they'll just call it something like, you know, explosion version 1, okay? And then, you know, explosion version 2 or whatever, and if they do version up, but then they even do, you know, version 10, and then because of the way that it works, version 10 comes up before, well, just after version 1, but before version 2, because they didn't say 002 or whatever, they didn't pad it, they just went 1, 2, 3, okay? And then I'll even see a lot of the time there'll be version 3, and then afterwards there'll be version 3 underscore temp, and version 3 underscore something else. And it's like, well, which one of those came afterwards? You know, you can't have multiple of the same version. That the whole point of the versioning is that they are separate. If you do change to do something else or work on something, you know, even like a test or something, you need to version up. Or if it is specifically a test, then don't version it. Then go and call it like something like version 0 or something like that, you know. Or create a separate folder for the test ones or something like that, so that it doesn't mess with the kind of stream. Because if they're all named and versioned correctly, I should be able to look here and see a long list of scene files and see all of the versions increasing every single time. And I just, you know, should go version 1, version 2, version 3. There should be no gaps. There shouldn't be 3 version 3s with separate kind of descriptions afterwards. Especially the worst one, the absolute worst. Please never in your life call any scene final, right? The amount of times where I see it's version 2 and then in final, and then afterwards there's version 2 final version 2, or version 2 final B, and then version 2 final B final. You know, it's it is the absolute worst, right? So that is definitely something we want to try and avoid. And then also something that happens here is that we're working on different things. So in one folder, we'll say, oh, explosion version 2, and then it'll be explosion test version something. And because before the version number, this name is actually changing, this will sort itself alphanumerically in a different order. So if I've got explosion test and then I've got explosion render, well, those are going to sort by the, you know, the T and R before sorting by the version number. So now my version numbers are all mixed. Okay. One place, for example, had a problem where people were putting their names, and I'm all for putting a username in your versioning. Okay, because it's often really good to know who worked on that scene, especially it's accountability, but also if, let's say, I see in my scene files it says Corbin, you know, I've been working on them, and then suddenly there's a scene file created by, you know, Bob. Well, then I know, okay, Bob took my scene and did something to it. If I'm not sure what he changed, at least I know I can go and ask him and say, hey, I see that you've got the latest version. what did you do? What did you change? You know, I went away for the weekend, come back, and there's a Bob version. Well, I say, hey, Bob, did something break? What did you do, so that I can continue working from it, right? So all for putting usernames in, but the problem is it's now before the version. So because my name starts with a C, mine are normally, you know, quite high up, because, you know, it's the third letter of the alphabet, and then someone like Zane comes and works on it, and he creates, you know, version, like maybe he's got version 1, but then I come along and start working on it, so I go Corbin version 2, and now suddenly mine's above his because my name comes first in the alphabet. So the order that we name this is very important, and kind of the whole structure of it needs to be hierarchical, right? So almost in the same way that you structure folders, where you've got your drive, and then you've got your actual folders, and, you know, so I'm working in, like, you know, it's in my documents folder, then work, which encompasses all of my work, but then Rebelway, which is one particular bit of work that I do. Then the project that goes under Rebelway. You know, we're used to the fact that folders form a hierarchy of information, going from less specific to more specific. Well, that's what we need to do with our naming convention, right? So what we're going to be doing is building a tool that saves for us, but asks the user for some very specific information, and then based on that information, it forces the naming convention. So not only does it put the HIP file in the correct location, but it also names it with all of the bits of information that are required for that scene, and puts those in the right order so that they are not alphanumerically sorted into sort of a weird way. Okay, so let me show you. We've got a test scene here. Let's assume now I'm working on something. I just click the save button, right? First thing it does is it pops up a dialog asking me to give a task and a description. So the task being, you know, I'm working on this shot, but what am I actually doing? What am I actually working on or tasked with? Okay, so I'm creating an explosion. Okay. And then I always like to add this description. And the description for me is basically, it's optional. I always put it in as optional, so we can leave the section blank. Okay, I haven't explained that here in the help or something, but maybe we should find a way to sort of say, hey, description is optional. We could even just put it in brackets here, optional or something. But what it really is saying, on this version, so I'm working on version 10, what was I doing? Because I've got version 10, version 11, version 12, version 13, okay? But what was I doing in each of those versions? Why did I save? Like, why did I increment my save? It makes much more sense when you see version 11 simulation, then version 12 caching, version 13 render test, version 14 shader fix. That tells me a story. That says that, okay, this person, whoever it was, went and did some simulation. Then they cached it out, right? After that, they did some render tests and clearly found that they needed to fix some shaders, because after that, there's a shader fix. Then there's a, you know, source fix. So they have to go back to their simulation to fix the source and obviously recache and re-render. The description tells me a story, which means when I come later, I can see what's been changed. And obviously, if I know that the problem, the reason I'm opening this other person's scene is to fix their simulation, well, I can see based on the description when they've changed the simulation. And so I know to go to the latest one of that, where maybe it used to work and now suddenly their collider is broken. Well, I can go one version back in the simulation fix and take the old collider that used to work and copy it into the new latest scene and fix it. Okay, so this is a really important bit, but obviously we need to allow it to be optional, because sometimes people don't have the time to fill that in. But again, that's sloppy. You should put a description. So for example, I'll always often do this when I'm starting a scene, is I'll just call it something like setup, because I'm starting to maybe import characters and just set my scene up so that I can start simulating. So I'm going to start working on an explosion here. and I say setup, and I click OK. Now that's all that I had to do, was just fill in some information and click OK. But then you'll see where it has saved my scene. So it saved it in the correct location, for one. Then what it has done is it has tagged, so there's separate sections to this name. The first one is that it gives my actual scene name. And that's because if this work file ever gets separated, maybe copied out or something like that, we know where this comes from. And also, if something like this goes to the render farm, often a render farm, like on something like Deadline or a Royal Render or whatever, will show the name of the HIP file as the file that it's rendering from. So it's hard to know that it came from from new scene, or let's say it's, you know, scene 1 shot 5 or something like that. How do I know that it's from that? Because it normally doesn't show the path to the file, but it will show the name of the file. So I always attach the scene name to the beginning, right? Then inside of that scene name, I then put, so we separate with a dash. I've got underscores separating everything within one section of the name, but then a dash and then the task, which means that every bit that I'm working on the same task, the explosion, that effect that has been given to me to do, will all be, you know, sorted together. It'll be explosion, 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 explosion. It should just say the same task all the way down here. But within the same folder, if someone is working on the magic, for example, it would then just say magic, 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 and, you know, so then it would be sorted into these kind of clusters or groups where I've got all my explosion files and this other person has all of their magic files. Now, if you wanted to, you could have subfolders based on the task name, if that's what you'd like. That, like, for example, at work, when I built this system at the studio, I did do exactly that. It actually takes the task name and creates a subfolder for it. But in this case, I haven't done that in this, but you can if you want to. But even if you don't, it's still fine because it's going to sort them all together, right? Then we have our description, our version, which is tagged with a V. Some people like to do that, others don't. But it does clearly look like, you can see, okay, this is version 1. Whereas if it's just numbers, you're not sure, you know, whether that's what that relates to. Okay, and I've padded it to 3 digits because you know, if I reach 999, saves, then I might, you know, I might need to reassess what I'm doing. And then after that, I put the descriptor. The descriptor is after the version number because whatever I type here will be different on every version. And so I don't want it to sort by this. I want it to first sort by the version, and then based on the version number, then this is just attached to it afterwards. And then the very final bit of information that it is attached is the username. Because it doesn't matter, I don't want it to be sorted by my username. So the absolute last bit of information I put is the username, okay? And then, of course, the extension. All right. So now this essentially, I can still Control S, which is normal save, right? So it'll successfully save my scene. But whenever I would save as, instead of Control Shift S, I just save here. In fact, at work, I've even set it up on my machine that the hotkey for this, okay, here it's Alt S, but at work I've actually swapped it for Control Shift S. So when I want to save as, it actually overrides it. Instead of coming to this dialog, it literally goes here asking me again, do I want to enter my task and description? Okay, so this replaces save as, and it comes up with, because it already detected my task and description, it puts them back in here, right, for me, so that I can continue on from where I was. Especially, it's making the assumption that the task is going to stay the same. Now, sometimes it won't, which is why it's an option to change it. Maybe I'm working on it and I do the explosion setup, which means I maybe import my characters, import the environment, and kind of get everything ready so that I can start simulating, but I don't actually do my sim yet. I might want to save this sort of sideways as the magic setup as well. Okay, because the magic scene is going to also need characters and environments and whatever. Okay, so I can save it sideways. So now when I click OK, it's going to create version 1, but of magic. Okay, so these are now 2 separate tasks, but they're both version 1 of that task. So you see how the hierarchy of data flows. So now on my magic scene, I can, of course, go over here, and maybe once I'm done setting up, I do some dev. So I'm maybe just going to experiment a little bit and do some things. So I click OK, and it creates, because I tried to save with the same task name, it will then increment my version up. Whereas here, when I changed tasks, it kept the version the same, because it's version 1 of explosion and version 1 of magic, but now I've created version 2 of magic, and it has a separate description. But that description follows the version number, so it's sorted first by scene, which they should all have the same scene, then by task, which they will not all be the same, but all of those that are the same will be grouped together. Then versions will be sorted, then descriptions will follow, and then very final is user, so that I can see, okay, it went, I was working on this, and then suddenly Bob picked it up, and then I picked it up again, and then Bob again, and you can kind of see as we pass the scene back and forward. Right. So I've also put in a quick save, which is if I control click the save, then what it does is it assumes, it's like me clicking to save, and it keeps the data as it was, and click OK. Right? So that's what the quick save does. So all it does, because it keeps the same task name and same description name, all it does is increments the version. So I can be working, I can control S, but then when I'm about to do something a bit maybe potentially destructive, I go and control click the save. So now it increments my version. So you'll see there it's now gone to version 4, but I'm still deving. Okay, and now when I'm going to change from deving to something else, I say, okay, well now I'm done deving, so now I'm going to do the main sim. So I just call it sim, and now it goes to version 5, and then maybe I'm about to do something big with my sim, so I control click it so that it moves to version 6, work on that, then go, okay, I'm going to now do test render, okay, and in fact, we're going to type test render here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some feature of this tool. I've put in a space. I'm also going to put in a capital. And let's even include something like a special character in here. So I'll put like a star there. And then I'm going to put a space at the end as well. Okay. So I just want to show you that that is kind of a really bad naming, right? So when I click OK, you'll see that it tries to fix the name for me, to test_render, right? So it was very smart. It stripped out the special characters, it stripped out the spaces and swapped them with underscores, and it stripped out the trailing or leading spaces as well, and made it all lowercase. Okay, obviously it can't fix everything, but we try our best to fix the naming so that if the user does type with uppercase and lowercase, or they put spaces, that we just force it to follow our convention that we want it to. And now you can see here, if you look at this, look how easy it is to read what's happening here. I know I'm working on my magic for that scene. These are the versions. I can see what order they are in. I know what I was doing at each stage, and I know who was working on it. Okay, and then there's my explosion. So if I decide I'm now going to go back to working on my explosion, I mean, obviously I could file open. So we'd go like file open and work on this. But then when we save explosion and say, okay, well now I'm doing the sim on the explosion. Now it creates version 2 of the explosion. Right, so it's just fully set up to essentially take our HIP file and use that to extract information to figure out what scene we're on in order to know how to proceed with saving as, or incrementing our save. And also as we save as well, of course, there it creates a backup. Okay. So this is essentially the features of this tool that we're now going to build. Okay, so now you know what it's meant to do. We can sort of take some notes from that and we're going to now build all of that together. Right, so I'll see you in the next lesson.